Hello, everyone. This is the overview for chapter 3. Again, just a brief overview of some of the key concepts, key ideas. Make sure to read the whole chapter on your own. So let's get started. I'm going to go here to the idea of introspection. This chapter is focused on the social me, or the identity, the social identity that we all have. We think of ourselves in certain ways. We may think of ourselves as smart or intelligent, athletic, driven, motivated. We all have an idea of who we are. And when we're asked to um, perhaps describe ourselves when we're meeting someone new or at an office, team building thing, hey, tell the other person 3 or 4 things about yourself, etc. We all have some words that we will use to describe ourselves, and that's the idea of self-knowledge, knowledge of one's self-identity. Now, the idea of introspection, of course, is one that is not new. It has been around for centuries. In fact, um, Plato wrote, "A life unexamined is not worth living." So clearly, even back in ancient times, ancient Greek times, there was this idea that introspection, self-introspection is something that's necessary. It's something that we should all do from time to time, because then that is how we get to know ourselves. Um, and Socrates, of course, or sorry, Plato suggested that if we do not engage in self-introspection, then life isn't worth living. Okay, I don't know if we'd all agree with him on that one, but certainly taking time to slow down in our very busy contemporary lives, urban lives that we all live, is something that we don't often stop to do. There are certain um, apps that you can use. One is Calm. I think another one is Mindspace that will help you to meditate, which may lead you to some degree of introspection. And so one thing, though, that we do know about self-introspection is that it's not always accurate. That is, we may think some things about ourselves that are not, in fact, true. We may believe certain things about ourselves that are not true. Whereas people who are not us, who interact with us, who are in our various social environments, may actually have a much more accurate view of who we are. And part of that could be there may be things that some of us just don't want to know about ourselves, or some things that we don't want to think too much about, or we may be motivated to think more highly of ourselves than maybe is warranted, right? So just something to consider, self-introspection, and how it is an important part of who we are, and we should try to do it, maybe not every day, but every now and then. Just really think about who we are, and are we the person that we want to be? And if we are, great. How could we maybe become better? And if we're not, maybe what are some of the things that we need to work on? Because I'm a strong believer we all need to work on becoming better people. I think we're always, as humans, we're always learning and developing. All right, here. A self-schema. Remember, schema was introduced in the first chapter. And so a self-schema is cognitive. It's a cognitive structure. And remember that schemas are formed from our past experiences. So we have an experience in church, say a church or a temple or a synagogue several times. We're going to form a self-schema. That is a schema for ourselves about how we act within that particular social environment. But it also will help us to develop ideas about ourselves and our own beliefs, and how we should act in general, but also in very specific situations. And, family influence, and we're going to focus here on socialization. Socialization is the process through which we all learn from those around us in our various social environments, family, schools, um, um, religious organizations, perhaps, depending upon your family or yourself. Um, Also, the media is a huge socializing agent. we all learn from these various social environments that we're part of. And one very large, for most people, influence, at least early in life, maybe as we get older it becomes less influential, but at least early in life, family is a huge, huge influence on who we are at our earliest ages and perhaps ultimately who we become. So there's a lot of research that's been done on birth order, on where, if your family, there are 5 children, are you number 1? Are you number 5? Are you number 3? Are you 4? Are you 2? The order in which we're born into a family may influence our personality traits. So here's an example. For many firstborn children, they are very disciplined. They are very much children who um, embrace the ideals of their parents, the principles of their parents, and they were expected to be very responsible, to adhere to a strict set of rules, and they were held to those. If you're the last born child in your family, then that may mean that parents were not quite as strict with you, and they didn't expect you to be quite as responsible. And maybe they didn't hold you as strictly to the rules that they had set for some of the older kids in your family. And there's a suggestion by social psychologists that that can influence your personality. Just being born in different different generation, well, not generations, but different times in one's family, and the dynamics of the family will be different depending upon whether you're that firstborn or you're the lastborn. Of course, siblings often will take on different roles in a family as well, right? It's called diversification by social psychologists. So maybe the oldest child, because that's the responsible one, is the one who takes charge at family gatherings, or maybe the youngest child is the one who is the jokester and keeps everybody entertained at family gatherings. Maybe the middle child is the one who tries to make sure that people are all getting along, and if there's some sort of disagreement happening, maybe that middle child is the one who tries to smooth things over. People often will take on different tasks within their family, and that's just something that people then come to expect. And it may actually at some point even be something that a child becomes resentful of, because they've always been expected to take on planning the family events, etc., or always being expected to be the happy, jolly entertainer. People may come to over time resent those expectations that others have of them simply because they've always taken that role on in the past. The looking glass self is a very old and well-known sociological idea. It was developed by Charles Cooley, who was a functionalist theorist sociologist, and he coined this term looking glass self because back in the latter part of the 19th century into the early part of the 20th century, a mirror was called a looking glass, right? Give me my looking glass meant give me my mirror. And of course, we all know when you look into a mirror, you see a reflection of yourself. And so with this theory, what Cooley suggested is that who we are, who we come to think of ourselves as, is largely a result of our interactions with other people. In fact, what Cooley suggested was that when we are interacting with others, what tends to happen is it's almost as if the other person is standing there interacting with us, but holding up a mirror, and that mirror is pointed at us. It's not facing toward the person, it's facing out. And so as we interact with that person, what we see is our own reflection in that mirror. What Cooley argued is that when people interact with us, they perceive things about us. Whether those things are true or not, they perceive things about us. And we can see their approval or disapproval in their interactions with us. And so if we see their approval of certain characteristics that we have, or personality traits, or things that we say or do, we may continue to engage in those things, those behaviors, those attitudes, etc. But if we see disapproval in their faces and their reactions toward us, then we may stop doing some of those things that we see others disapprove of. And so over time, that can shape how we think of ourselves. So here's an idea. Think about a child who, at an early age, say, I don't know, hold on, plug in my laptop here. I see it's going to start draining itself battery. Think about a child who, as a toddler, that child is being told, you're such an intelligent child, you're such a smart child, you know your numbers, you know your letters, you know your shapes, and then the child goes to preschool and the teachers and teaching assistants are all saying, you're so smart, you know your numbers, you know your shapes, colors, etc. And then the child gets to kindergarten and the child is told, you're so intelligent, you're so smart, wow, you already know how to do this, you know how to do that, wow, you are so intelligent. What Cooley suggests is that over time, this child will begin to not only think of him or herself as being intelligent, but that the idea of being intelligent will become part of that child's self-identity, that the child will internalize the idea that he or she is smart or they are smart because people around have treated that child as being intelligent and they've shown approval. Now, of course, it's not always positive. Sometimes adults can tell a child, or other children can tell a child, negative things. You're ugly, you're fat, you know, you're stupid, etc. And if enough people around that child tell this child that, the child, and of course they're treated with disapproval because they're ugly or stupid or whatever, then that child may begin to believe that they are in fact ugly or stupid or whatever. And so that may become a part of their self-identity. So that's what Cooley is saying may be happening with looking glass self-theory. And I personally think that there is a lot of merit in this theory, simply because I've seen it in people I know as adults. Maybe something that they were called as a child that was negative. Today they still think of it themselves as being that. Here's an example. I have a good friend. As a child, her older siblings, two older sisters, called her narizona, which is Spanish for big nose. And here she is in her mid-50s, and she still thinks of herself as having a big nose. I don't view it as a big nose. It's just a nose that fits on her face, but she still is quite self-conscious about her nose. And you can find any number of other incidents where people may believe something about themselves, either positive or negative, and it may not necessarily be true. For example, some people may think they're beautiful because when they were children, they were beautiful and they were told that they were beautiful children. But maybe as adults, maybe they're not so much, but they still think of themselves as beautiful, right? So that's Cooley's idea. The other socializing agents, as I said, there's family, of course, a big one, teaching us our norms and our values, how to act in certain situations, how to dress, etc. But also our peers, our friends, our little buddies, our acquaintances, kids that we play on the playground with, kids that we're on sports teams with, kids that we're in clubs and organizations with. Those individuals also help to shape our identities of ourselves. And schools, because schools are teaching us, reinforcing the norms and the values that our parents have begun to teach us, and the values and the norms that society wants us to exhibit so that we can become good, productive members of society. Excuse me. I had a little tickle in my throat there. And so students who comply with all the rules, those are the good students, and the students who don't, well, those are the troubled or the problem students. And in fact, I don't think it's necessarily so. I think it's just that some kids, they're not willing to accept blindly everything that they're told. They just have this nature where they challenge things. And yes, that can be problematic for the teachers and the principals, but it could just mean that these are just really smart kids too. So all right, so now I want to get to this idea of how we think of ourselves and whether we think of ourselves and in the sense of being very independent. Um, if we are in a individualistic society like the US, we tend to think of ourselves with an independent view of our own selves. That is, we are connected to others, and you see in this little diagram here that the self, the individual in the middle, is connected to these other people, but those connections are not quite as deep. You see that they're connected at the surface, and some of those connections are even further out, say the coworker and the friend, and even a sibling. And the interdependent view of self, which is more common in collectivistic cultures, those cultures that many Asian cultures, some Latinx cultures are much more individualistic, where there's a focus on family and what you do matters because it affects other people. There you see that the self is overlapping with the others within their social environments, even the coworker. The idea that what you do at work doesn't just affect you, it also affects your coworker. And that's something that is quite different than the way many of us think of being at work. And many of us think, okay, I'm at work, I'm doing my work. I don't really need to think about how what I do affects other people. Although, with some of the diversity and inclusion work that some companies are creating and requiring their employees to go through, there is more of an emphasis on really thinking about how what we do, what we say, can affect other people. So kind of going toward more of an interdependent view of self. Although if it's just being done at work, it's probably not going to happen a lot in a lot of the other venues or social environments a person's in. Gender. I want to really focus here on gender and how, depending upon the culture that you grow up in, gender may play a very large role in how you think of yourself. That is, particularly in most cultures, even westernized cultures, I'd argue today, that boys are often socialized to believe that they are strong and that they can do anything they want, which typically means then that they become more driven, more motivated, more fearless even, because they're told, hey, you can go ahead and do that thing. Whereas if you're a female child, or you're viewed as being a female child, because we know today that some children may actually be non-binary, if you're viewed as being a female child, you're typically given the message that you are less capable, that you should be less competitive, that you should be more caring and nurturing in your actions with others, and you may be discouraged from doing things because they are too dangerous. Things such as playing football or climbing trees, etc. And so girls are also, it seems, at early ages, trained more to watch for the social cues of others. Are others showing disapproval? Then maybe we should pull back from what we've said or what we're doing. If others are showing approval, then we continue to engage in that. And I'll just give a really quick example here, because I think females are often still in more traditional Latinx families trained to do this. As a girl, I was trained by my mother that anytime one of my brothers or my father, because I'm number 7 of 9 children, because I had older siblings, quite a few, anytime one of them who's male came home, father or brothers, then I was to offer them something to eat or drink. Ask if they were hungry, and if they said yes, ask them if they wanted something to eat, and then make it for them. And of course, the same was true of people coming to the home. If my mother wasn't there when somebody dropped by, then whatever oldest female was home was the one to take the lead and offer these visitors something to eat or drink while they were waiting for my mother to come back from the store. My brothers were not trained this way. And so it never crossed their minds, if no females were home, that they should offer people something, because that's just not something they were trained to do. And I think even today, that tends to happen, whereby women, if they're, going to run out to grab a cup of coffee in the workplace, they might say, "Hey, everyone, I'm making a coffee run. Does anyone else want coffee from Pete's or Starbucks, or the coffee place down the street that everybody goes to?" Whereas men often will go and get that coffee, come back, and others will notice, this fucker went to go get coffee and didn't ask if the rest of us wanted any. It's just something that we're trained, that we're often not aware of. And so that is a big piece of how we think of ourselves. Even when we think of ourselves in terms of our characteristics, our attributes, good and bad, women are often much more critical about their appearances or about their abilities to do things, whereas men are often much less rarely, or are rarely as often critical of their abilities or skills, etc. And here's just some clips if you want to take a look at them, just to see some of the ways in which men and women are differently portrayed in the media. And it still happens quite a bit today. Just think of any hip hop videos that you've seen. The men are fully clothed and they're rapping or doing their hip hop song, and they're fully clothed, whereas most of the time the women are very scantily clothed. They're showing off, breasts, breast cleavage and butt cleavage, etc. And the men are and they're fawning over the men and doing all these crazy dances, and the men are just rapping away. So all of those examples are, I think, still very much in play today, even in the second decade of the 21st century. All right, so I want to focus on sociometer hypothesis. This is an idea that we all have this sort of self-esteem that's internal, right? It's subjective. Some people think very highly of themselves, while others around them may not. It's a subjective index. It's a marker of how much we are included by others, how favorably they look upon us, how much they approve or disapprove of us. And that sociometer hypothesis may tell us, the sociometer hypothesis says that this internal, a thermometer of sorts, can tell us perhaps when we might need to improve social bonds with others. And the argument is that this probably goes back all the way through our early evolution as humans, in which it would have been very difficult as a cave human 10,000 years ago to be on your own, to be a loner, because doing so meant that you didn't have anybody to help protect you. And as cave humans, early cave humans, they didn't have the use of fire. They didn't have the use of weapons. They hadn't learned how to make a wheel yet, etc. And so it would have been very difficult for them, for an individual who was a loner, to survive. You needed other humans to help you gather food, to help you stay warm, to help protect one another from predators, animals, etc. And so we needed to have people. And social psychologists and sociologists and psychologists all believe today, anthropologists as well, strongly believe that we, as humans, we need other people. Sure, we all want to be by ourselves at one time or another. We want a little bit of, time to self-reflect, or just to be alone and chill, decompress, whatever word you want to use. But deep down, most of us want to be around other people. Most of us, we look forward to being around other people. The pandemic has certainly taught us that. Maybe at first you thought, oh, cool, I don't have to go to class. I don't have to be around instructors. Oh, good, I can just, watch videos, etc. But for a lot of students, they found they actually missed the classes. They found they missed going to campus and interacting with other students, even if it just meant being in a classroom with others, or being at the bookstore, or at Barbara's on campus. And then you were around other people and there was activity and you felt that you were part of something. When you're closed away by yourself or with just a few other people, you may find that, wow, I didn't realize how much I actually liked being around other people. But then again, there are people, some, who prefer to be loners, who prefer to be alone. But the vast majority of humans, we need other people. We want to be around other people. All right. And of course, just really quickly about culture here. In interdependent cultures, those cultures that are, independent cultures, um, we tend to report higher levels of self-esteem than people who are living in those collectivistic cultures where they have an interdependent sense of self. It seems as though in westernized cultures, feeling good about yourself is something that's encouraged, right? In fact, that's perhaps why TikTok and Instagram are so popular, because we can post things on those social platforms and get likes and get people to follow us, and something can go viral that we post, which tells us, hey, people approve of me, people like me. On the other hand, in those interdependent cultures where people have this interdependent view of themselves, talking about yourself and talking about your accomplishments and how wonderful you are is viewed in a negative way. You're not supposed to do those types of things. And so you may not feel very good about yourself. And if you don't feel very good about yourself, then you're not so happy. In fact, in many Asian languages, there is no equivalent word for the concept of self-esteem that we have in the English language and in most westernized languages. So that should really be very telling. All right, let's see. All right, I think that's about what I wanted to focus on in this chapter. So remember, read the rest of the chapter, and I will see you for the chapter 4 overview.